Good afternoon to everybody and welcome to the IVI and Empower Data Governance and Data for Good webinar. Really excited to have everybody online and in the room today where we have a hybrid event. We've some fun earlier figuring out the hybrid environment. I'm sure everyone has still some struggles on that as well. So hopefully you can hear us okay, and we'll make our way through the webinar today. So my name is Denise Manton. I'm the Executive Director of the Empower Data Governance Research Programme. Just a little bit of an intro to Empower if you're not already familiar with it. It's a €10 million multi-stakeholder research programme, and it's dedicated to the multidisciplinary field of data governance. The programme is funded by industry partners and Science Foundation Ireland, which is our Irish National Agency for Science Research here in Ireland. And the programme, it brings together 4 world-leading Science Foundation Ireland research centres also. So LERO, the programme lead, Insight, Adapt and Future Neuro, and it's coordinated by Professor Marcus Helford, who is also here with us today, who will speak briefly later on. So we, as I say, this whole area of data for good is something that I think we're all very interested in. Everyone's got, I suppose, can see the benefits for it. So we're really excited to talk to our panel today on that. We're going to look at the challenges, the opportunities around data governance, and how we can unlock the potential of data and open data, how we can do that ethically and responsibly, so that we can deliver benefits for all, and look at how we can do this for the common good. We're also going to dive into as well, I suppose, some of the mechanisms or how we can co-create best practices for data governance. So lots of opportunities, lots of challenges. We all recognise that, and the panel will have some really good examples of that today. But how can we come together as a community, and how can we work together to overcome these challenges? So enough of me talking. You've come here today to listen to our fantastic panel. I would encourage you to submit your questions in the Q&A, or if you have comments as well. It's not just, I suppose, about the questions. We want to hear your feedback and your views on this topic as well, because it really is the collective experience and views of everyone that will help us all move forward. I also want to note that this webinar is being recorded for on-demand access at a later date. So on we go. We will meet today with Andrea Sipka, Dr. Martin Cunneen, William Hoffman and Mary Flynn. So first up is Andrea. Andrea is Scientific Manager for Data Science and its application at the German Research Centre for AI, DFKI. And Andrea is also the manager for the Data Science for Social Good Fellowship. So it's a really exciting programme that Andrea has given us information about, and we'll talk to today as well. It's I suppose a programme that really shows data for good in action. So Andrea has also worked on similar initiatives in this area in the UK, and prior to that worked as a software engineer and release lead at IBM as well. So is very familiar with the industry side as well. So Andrea, enough of me talking. I'm going to hand over to you, and we'll talk to you again then towards the end. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Denise. I'm very pleased to kick off the proceedings for today. I am joining you from Western Germany, where, as Denise said, I'm a scientific manager at the German Research Center for AI at a department called Data Science and its Applications. Our department is quite new. We were started by Professor Sebastian Vollmer when he moved from UK, where he was teaching at Warwick, to Germany, and kind of brought along a bunch of initiatives, but also a bunch of us alongside with him. Our department has 4 main research pillars. The first one is methods, the data science methods. We tend to focus on things like Bayesian methodology and causal machine learning, but also methods related to synthetic data. The second is applications, which is in our name, where we work with various partners in different industries, but also different research institutions, and in particular focus on use of data in healthcare and clinical applications. Our third pillar is tools. So we focus on development of open source tools and packages such as machine learning in Julia, but also deploying and further developing trusted research environments that can be used to kind of enable data sharing between different either research partner industries and research, as well as enable programs like our data science for social good. And finally, our social good is our fourth pillar. And even though a lot of our application work and methods work can be classified as social good, we tend to kind of single this out as a fourth one, because in addition to the R&D work we do in this area, we run this data science for social good fellowship. And this is what I'm here to talk to you about. It's my favorite part of my job, something that I'm greatly enthusiastic about. So I always appreciate an opportunity to try to impact other people with this. So deploying data science solutions that affect people directly is really rare. You know, brilliant scientists produce like this huge opus of research. So this is just something to do with patient and data science or machine learning or AI. If you look in Google Scholar, there is over 20,000 in a year. And so, you know, this is smart people that invest a lot of time and hopefully pass this like high bar of scientific scrutiny to publish their work. And from there, what happens with this work? You know, some of them might get to a feasibility study, but even less will end up with trials. So we've kind of estimated that a few years ago, it was of these 20,000, about 153 ended up having a trial run, and even less get deployed. And so this is kind of the reason why Professor Vollmer, first in the UK in 2019, but also since decided to sort of try to short circuit this and kind of bring more of this research ideas, but also research community into something that kind of directly affects people and hopefully does it in a positive way. So that's the idea for our data science and social good fellowship. And so what is it, you may ask? So a recipe for one fellowship is pretty simple. We take a group of young data scientists. Now they might be doing their master's or in their PhD, or they have recently graduated. Maybe they're social scientists, maybe they are engineers. Either way, they have a drive to learn new skills. They have some basic technical competency and they want to use those skills for good. Then we add partner organizations. So those are our project partners. They might be a government agency that wants to improve lives of children in foster care, or an NGO that is working to reduce homelessness. Either way, our partner organizations, they have the data and they want to use that data to help either the people or their environment or their society, but they might not have that data science expertise that is needed to kind of marry the two together. And then we add a few mentors. They are experienced scientists and project managers who sort of successfully get infected with our enthusiasm and decide to take sabbatical from work for 3 months and sort of come along to help guide these fellows and help them deliver solutions for partners. So those are kind of 3 main ingredients, and you put those ingredients together in one room, in our case in Western Germany, for 12 weeks in the summer, and you kind of simmer on low to medium heat, and the result is a data product that we deliver to the partner organization and that the partner can then use to help the communities that they serve. So not a research paper, although sometimes the research papers do come afterwards, and not a written report, although we also deliver a written report to the partner, but an actual product that can be deployed with little to no effort, we hope, on the partner side and kind of be used directly. So this data product is, yes, it's one of the things that our fellows create for the partner, but it's not even in our top 3 goals of the fellowship. So first thing that we want to do is we want to train these young data scientists, yes, how to do data science, but also how to create useful and usable solutions, how to communicate with stakeholders, and how to do all of this in essentially an ethical, open, and collaborative way. We also want to train our project partners. These are often organizations that are in the very beginning of their data-driven journey. And so we want to give them a great product, but we also want them to see what data science can do and to encourage them to kind of more pick up this kind of either data-driven decision-making or kind of evidence-based, data/evidence-based decision-making. And finally, we want to build a community of practitioner researchers, organizations, and even companies that want to do data for good, use data for good, and to do it as well as they can. So I hope you're already part of the community, but if not, hopefully you'll become by the end of this webinar today. So this community already includes a lot of even just research organizations. The fellowship itself was started many years ago now at the University of Chicago by Raid Ghani in 2013. We first did a fellowship in the UK in 2019. And so once Professor Vollmer has moved to Germany, so did the fellowship, but it still remains going at the University of Warwick. Other institutions have partaken as well. So a few I've placed here, like Imperial did it for 1 year, Nova School of Business in Portugal did it for 2. There is a fellowship now at Carnegie Mellon, but also similar programs at Stanford, at University of Washington, for example. So we kind of try to kind of keep this going, and sort of we hope that there will be as many of these fellowships as possible. Now, you might quite rightfully think that 12 weeks is not quite a lot of time to do something that's useful. So it does help that our fellows are really good and talented and driven, but we also pay them a stipend over the summer because we don't want them to have to work extra jobs to make sure to support themselves, and we don't want them to make to need to kind of go and do an internship in a bank instead of doing this because of money reasons. So we pay them a competitive stipend. We also hire full-time staff for the summer. And so essentially the mentors are there and the fellows are driven. Hopefully the salary has removed all of these other considerations. But another thing that's important is it's important to choose the right projects and take on something that's doable. Now, what makes a good project for us, we accept partner applications throughout the year via email, Twitter, I'll post, word of mouth, any kind of ways. And then we engage with these organizations to talk and try to figure out if there is a project there and whether it is something that can be done. So we always look for projects that are impactful, of course. So sometimes this means making difficult decisions about who do you help versus who you don't help. But we always try to then take these partners that we can't help and either suggest other organizations or take that work on as part of our other research that we do in a group. Also, we look at whether something is solvable in a 12-week time. So we engage with the partner in multiple conversations before the summer starts and sort of try to estimate what kind of work can be done and what can be done, especially considering what data there is available and whether there is an additional data that we can obtain either in like an open data sphere or whether some data can be purchased or donated by some of the companies, for example, satellite imagery, if you're trying to estimate, forest degradation, for example. But we also look for partners that can actually take direct action based on the product that we make. So we work with organizations that can, for example, inspect a foster care home if there is a suspicion that the quality of care has reduced based on some activity because the model says so, rather than an organization that would just write a paper about the quality of care. So our partners, we work with the organizations across governmental and third sector, anywhere in the world. We don't work with for-profit organizations as partners because we kind of think that hopefully they're making profit and they can also hire their own data scientists. And this, even though sometimes they can have like a societally beneficial product, we try to kind of help those that don't really have access to these kind of resources usually. Now, since we ran our first fellowship in 2019, we have worked with, for example, procurement agency in Paraguay, environmental agency in Chile, education and childcare in the UK, but also charities like Ofsted, like Homeless Link, or for example, Investigative Journalism Network or CCRP this year. I want to give you a few examples of what kind of projects we have done. So some of those problems, we tackle things to do with detecting irregularities or anomalies. So for example, we worked with the with the Paraguay's public procurement agency for a few years now, to kind of detect different things that can go wrong in the public procurement process, whether somebody's maybe writing a tender that's a bit too specific because they have a buddy who is selling, I don't know, tractors, or essentially to try to catch these cheeky corruptions and therefore reduce it. We also often work on inspection problems. So where we might help a government body how to inspect foster care providers better based on events or happenings in those homes, or environmental agency helping them prioritize which environmental complaints they go to first based on kind of where they can have the most impact and what's most urgent. Or like trying to figure out how resources can be placed in the best way in a homeless charity so that they can kind of get support to rough sleepers in the UK. Or we may work on problems, something that combines a lot of different data sources, for example, with the West Midlands Combined Authority, combining both partners' data, but also open data that is available about transport or census data in the UK to figure out what are the underserved communities in West Midlands when it comes to transport, like where, for example, a large amount of people who are poor live and how can they get to job centers. So those are the examples of projects. Indeed, we have quite some challenges as well. Maybe just a few that I want to highlight. The first one is spreading the word. We kind of really rely on people knowing that we exist so that they can bring us partners and suggest us both fellows and staff. A big one for us is data, both availability and sharing. A lot of times these organizations don't necessarily have their own data yet, and they need help actually collecting the data, which we can't help with, but also sharing, because some of these organizations work with really vulnerable individuals. And so understandable that they're apprehensive about kind of letting anybody kind of get hold of this data. So that's something that we try to overcome with trusted research environments, as well as, of course, practices such as data sharing agreements and kind of legal framework. And finally, of course, money, because this is a fellowship that's not cheap to run. And so we rely on a lot of kind of university money at the moment. But in the past, we've had also funders from industry, both in terms of cash and in kind. So trying to figure out a way to fund a program like this is something that, of course, I think about pretty often. So thanks a lot for the opportunity to talk to you about it, and I look forward to the rest.
Thank you so much, Andrea. That is so interesting, and it's amazing how much you're able to achieve in those 12 weeks and how you've actually structured the program. And I suppose it really highlights and the nice way you have it kind of broken down in impact and solvable and actionable. It highlights applying a criteria, that type of criteria to a problem can deliver, quick wins, because I suppose we tend to look at data for good problems as these massive challenges, which they are. What you've done there is so impressive. And there are some questions, but we'll move through all the presentations, and then we'll address the questions at the end. So please do keep the questions and comments coming, and as I say, we will get to them at the end. So thank you, Andrea. Next, we're going to move on to Dr. Martin Cunneen, who is a lecturer in data analytics and risk governance in the Accounting and Finance Department in University of Limerick, and is also an FI in Lero. Martin has, I suppose, quite an interesting background as well of looking at data analytics, as I said, and risk governance, but also works on modules on AI and data risk, and brings the ethics piece into his work as well around governance, and it's also focused on investigating the science of data analytics in terms of broader societal relations, risks, ethics, and governance. And as I say, covers several different areas, from explainable AI to tech governance theory, black box decision making, and more. Martin, really looking forward to hearing your talk as well today, because as I say, I know you kind of bring a different perspective to it and have some really interesting European projects as well, European funded projects that you're working on. So I'll hand over to you now, Martin, as well.
Thanks, Denise. That was a brilliant introduction. Thank you. So yeah, I think Andrea, I liked your talk. It was really insightful. I think this space of research and data governance is a really timely one, in the sense that I really am lucky to do what I do in terms of my research, and hopefully, doing research that has an impact to help people make better decisions regarding data. And I can sense from even Andrea the excitement and the appreciation to work in this field. So my title is Lecturer in Data Analytics and Risk Governance, and what I do really is I try to understand the complexity of how data commercialization has entered our world. And what I want to do here today is just kind of give you an overview of what I do in my teaching and in my research. So I use this image quite often in my lectures at the start of each year, and really we have fallen or tripped up into what is the data society. We got here quite quickly, and we're kind of still a little bit disorientated in the sense of what the data society actually means, and what benefits and what kind of risks it introduces into our life. So I remember in 1994, traveling 30 miles in the UK. I was in college at the UK at the time, and we went to what was the first internet cafe. And at that time, we went, and it was an amazingly exciting experience to go online and to look at the web. And there was this framing, there was this narrative of the global village. And immediately I bought myself a really expensive router and got online and took part in what was this global village. And that's how it started. That's how it just blossomed, from people connecting, sharing resources, information, media worldwide. And the global village was the start of it all. And I don't know, can you all hear that sound? Yeah, so that sound was the sound that we all kind of, experienced was Windows XP. This was the start of it all. And at that time, there was great excitement, there was great sort of potential. And also what we found was that there was great potential for business, for commercialization, as the world moved online, as we transitioned to this online digital medium. But a lot of people were kind of still getting used to what it meant, what it meant to be online, what it meant to be a digital citizen, what it meant to access this wealth of global information and resources and tools. So what I want to put to you today is that when we started out, it was all very exciting, but soon we quickly realized there was a bit of complexity to it. We got a bit disorientated along the way. But now we have what I believe, especially in the European Union, an opportunity. There's a new horizon, and that's what I want to kind of say. So when we look at innovation and technology, quite quickly we see that, since the Industrial Revolution, we've mechanized, we've grown, we've developed. And if we consider really this image here of the phone, what we see is 100 years of innovation, from this Bakelite phone to our cordless phone, right? That's 100 years, essentially. And that was slow. That was a slow kind of pace of innovation. But we had time to kind of appreciate what it meant. But that's 20 years of innovation, where we went from a cordless phone, like a brick, to a smartphone. And what this means is that socially, and in terms of our social participation, it was all very new to us. Digitization was all very new to us. Connectivity was all very new to us. And, with the smartphone, with this transition through the analog to the digital, and eventually reaching the smartphone and the app ecosystem, what we found was a different world of connectivity, of participation, of community. And a lot of the time with immersing ourselves in this digital world, we came to appreciate the benefits of access and inclusion and community, but we also came to feel some of the risks. And this is where unfortunately, we were kind of tripped up along the way, because human beings are social creatures. We want to connect. We want to be social. We want to speak. We want to connect with our family, friends. We want to engage and meet new people. So part of this is what Sherry Turkle actually highlighted in the late 90s. And there was this idea of our human nature to be social creatures. And digitization gave us that power. It empowered us to be more social. But we tripped up along the way, I think, and this is the important message I think I want to kind of communicate to you, is that with digitization and with the commercialization, what we found was that there was a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of opportunities to commodify and monetize data. And the freemium platform economies evolved and emerged and quickly defined what was our digital data life. And we immersed in it, we took it, we embraced it, because there was no one really telling us about the risks of it. But now we have a different era. We're moving out of this era, I think, of data commercialization and data industrialization. We're moving into an era where we're asking this question, well, how can we make data for good? Now, the data economy will always be part of it. Business will always be a major driver in terms of what data society we live in, what data society we have. But alongside the data economy, what we have is an opportunity for a better, more informed context of data citizenship and data community. And the EU is really leading that. It's leading that narrative, that potential to enable and empower people, citizens, to make more informed decisions about how their data is used. And that's really what the General Data Protection Regulation was about. It took a long time to get there, but once we get there, it was the first strategic move by the EU, globally even, to try and sort of empower citizens to have a choice about how their data is used, stored, and commodified. Now, we all know there's limitations and challenges with the GDPR, but essentially the EU has become a lighthouse globally to try and empower other states to take a more proactive and citizen-focused strategy towards data empowerment. And we see that, like, for example, Australia, India, everyone looks at the GDPR as the kind of go-to mechanism to develop their own strategic data regulation. So industry, the data economy will always be a part of it. But thankfully to the GDPR, we now have the start of a conversation in terms of how we want to define our data citizenship, our data community, and our data economy. And with the new Data Act, what we're finding now is that it's not just about personal data, but it's also about what we call industrial data. It's about data that is created through Internet of Things, through different devices, sensors. All this data has value if it can be useful to someone, to somebody. But translating or transforming that value into a monetary value takes investment, takes understanding, takes a business model. But to be competitive globally, and this is the challenge with the EU, is that we want to be competitive, but we want to get data right as well. So we are actually in the lead in terms of, how data regulation informs our data economy, but we still have to keep innovating. And this is a key kind of challenge for all of us, is that in terms of the EU and data governance, we're at the start of something new. And we have this opportunity to actually get this right, to get data governance right, to get the data ecosystem right. And by doing so, the EU will actually be something strategic that will inform other states around the world. And this collectively then will speak to a global data market of data sharing, where it's not just data sharing in the EU context, but in terms of our own market and our own sovereignty, but actually data sharing in a global market, because I do believe that other states will follow suit in terms of, if we can get it right, they will also take advantage of what we have endeavored to achieve. And this is why in the EU, it's a very citizen-focused strategy. It's about empowering and building upon our existing rights and trying to develop those rights in terms of our digital identity, and our digital presence and our digital activities and behavior. So the EU really is pushing ahead and trying to develop a really informed strategy that empowers citizens. But it also wants to empower businesses, because this is the key to our own development and economic development, is that we have to leverage the opportunities to commercialize data, but we have to do it in a transparent and fair way. We have to empower citizens to take advantage and to make informed decisions about how their data is used. So that's the general narrative, and this is why I think the idea and the strategy of data sharing and creating data spaces is a powerful one. It's a powerful way of kind of visualizing how people and different stakeholders can come together and promote an environment where there's transparency, where there's informed decision making, and where there's consent about how data can be used for good. So throughout all of the different areas of our life, throughout industry, our citizens, our societies, from every kind of facet of what we do in terms of our economy, our transportation, our health, there's an opportunity to leverage data for socio-economic benefits and for citizen benefits and for environment benefits. And I think this idea of data for good can be empowered if we can get data governance right. Now that will be, that will take a lot of work. We have to understand the problem space. We have to understand the risk and benefits, but we have to also know how to create new governance mechanisms and instruments that are informed by multi-stakeholder participation from industry, from citizens, from interest groups, and from states to create an agile, adaptable data governance ecosystem. Denise, I'd better stop there, really, haven't I?
Sorry, Martin, just trying to come up with you. That's so interesting, Martin, and I suppose it brings so many different aspects to it. When you talk about the data society, and we got there too quickly, maybe, or and I think I suppose that's quite common of lots of technology things, that even if you look in the health sector, the technology might be there, but we don't have the business models and the kind of best practice and everything else to go with it to actually maybe use the technology safely. And I suppose there's similarities then in what you're saying about the data society and how we got there quite fast. I really like what you're talking about as well, about empowering citizens and empowering businesses. It's not an either or. I suppose for this really to work and for us to become I suppose a society where we have the proper governance and everything there, we need to have both. So I think that's really interesting, and that this is the EU Data Governance Act, and that it is the start, and many episodes to come, as you say, in that series. But at least I think the conversation is well underway. It is a start, and there's lots of people, and especially I guess on this call today as well, who are devoted to this area and want to move ahead. So I think there's actually just so much there. I'm sure that we will have plenty of questions at the end as well, Martin. So thank you very much for that. Really, really insightful. So next we will move to Bill. So Bill Hoffman leads the initiatives on data for common purpose at the World Economic Forum, and also, I suppose, oversees actually a global network of 15 innovation hubs and a community of industry, civil society, government and academic leaders focused on leveraging emerging technologies for a trustworthy and balanced society. So, and in particular leads initiative in advancing the needs for human-centered approaches, which empower individuals with greater autonomy and understanding of emerging networked technologies. And I suppose the word, again, empowering is coming up quite a lot today, and empowering citizens, empowering businesses. So, and I know we've had a lot of discussions on this as well, Bill, in the work that you're doing there in the World Economic Forum. So again, really looking forward to your talk. So I'll hand over to you now, Bill. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Denise. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you to Andrea and Martin for your comments as well. Martin, I just think you've hit on such a fundamental truth, that the tech accelerated at a pace far faster than our understanding of it. And I think that just you hit the nail on the head as far as the work of the World Economic Forum is starting to frame some of the tensions, some of the, I'll call it chronic trade-offs that in many ways we love and hate technology, the benefits, the outcomes, the utopian vision, but also the risks. And the work that I've been doing dates back to just about, as you mentioned, but at the advent of mobile phones and the advent just of the compute power accelerating, but just I'll call it the big data era. And like any technology, of course, it starts off with a positive pro-utopian narrative. On one hand, largely to sell the tech and infrastructure so that people will buy it, right? You can kind of go back in the annals of tech marketing, and there's always the words of transformation and change and cheaper, faster, better. But that aside, I think that the key element that for me is important is the notion of balance and navigating when you connect all of these various entities in a network system, that it's a complex network systems, and there's a whole different set of dynamics and elements. And I think in many ways, many people are still catching up to the dynamics of a networked economy, of unpacking the concept of complex versus complicated systems, all the work where I think the academic community has been invaluable. And I think, to a degree, part of the public awareness, particularly through COVID, is folks are understanding these different dynamics and the different elements. So with that as a background, the work that I've been focused on starts largely with the stakeholder community of private sector data holders, those that have built, designed, and commercialized systems to advance in many ways the commercial aims of a given entity. And what we've been doing is trying to expand the scope of that work to include what I'll call non-financial outcomes. That's backed by a larger narrative that the forum has been advancing for close to 50 years on stakeholder capitalism, that the role of business is to invest in outcomes related to the environment, social good, on governments, in inclusion, and that successfully being able to deliver on those outcomes or to be a part of that ecosystem just builds, to be blunt, the world we want, right? That it's balanced, it's equitable, it's fair, those principles that we've all shared and Denise mentioned in the setup. And one other element that I think has changed from the macro environment, the zeitgeist, so to speak, is the growing adoption, awareness, importance of the ESG narrative. Yes, there's a lot of confusion, that there's a lot of clarity needed there, but from a leadership perspective, the willingness of commercial actors to commit to disclose their measurable and auditable outcomes on things not directly tied to their financial performance, to me is a really important, if you will, milestone that wasn't in place, 10, 15 years ago as our digital technologies took root. And so against that backdrop of indicators, of auditable indicators, of outcomes that collectively people want, I think one of the milestones or one of the defining attributes of the world we live in is the world of indicators, right? ESG, SDG, there are these macro indicators that folks are saying that if we execute against that we'll have lower risk, we'll have a better environment, things will improve. And so that's one element that our work has been doing, is repositioning and reframing, if you will, the data narrative, to not call it the data narrative, right? To really pivot towards shared outcomes. What are the key questions, the risks, the decisions that need to be made to achieve some of the outcomes that a variety of different actors are all agreeing to that. And so that the data narrative becomes a means to that end. And so that's the one big pivot that we've been trying to do, is to turn the story upside down and inside out. So we start with the questions, the outcomes, the commercial risks, the legal risks, the technical risks, and to work in that way. And the work to get to that element within what we call our Data for Common Purpose initiative has three different work streams. Starting in the middle is work that's being done to identify what are the various technological infrastructure developments that the trustworthy and responsible use of data and AI and Andrea, you did a great job of articulating all the various mechanisms that need to be in place for responsible and trustworthy outcomes. And so that stack, that narrative, resides within certain communities. Obviously, the tech sector knows that, but as you get to senior leaders, as you get to policymakers, as you get to individuals, what's possible and how can the use of data be used in ways that simply are different than when things started off at 15 years is one of our outcomes. And it leverages, obviously, a lot of the narrative around distributed technologies, Web3, blockchain, DAOs. But I think one of the reframing is distributed systems, right, are a little different, have a more granular and adaptive context and can be highly tuned to the needs of individuals than what canonically are centralized systems, right? And so that's one element. And so we're working on, how can we coach people up on the ways that frontier technologies can be collectively orchestrated to give fair, accountable, trustworthy outcomes. The other one on strengthening trust and consent is the awareness, the engagement, the empowerment of individuals. And so highly complex topic. I know we could spend hours walking through that. The work that we're doing takes a tiny sliver of it and works with some of the financial services providers and others where data is explicitly generated and aware by people. So, a credit card transaction, right? Or a phone call. But when you're nominally generating data, how can the permissions in the reuse of that data flow with the data as it goes into different contexts, as it gets offered up into different shared spaces, into different collaboratives? But can we more effectively track the permissions of how data potentially could be used in a variety of contexts that are outside the original context for when it was captured? But there's all types of other work, and happy to share with work that we're doing. I think one of the more exciting and innovative spaces is on massive and passive data when you don't know, right, that data is being collected. This call in particular, I have no idea how the words, the bits, my language is being used. There's nominally certain things that are given by Zoom, but there's all types of secondary and tertiary uses. And so what we're working on is a visual grammar. If you imagine the different icons, in the back of your clothing of how you wash and iron it, of the ways that the data can and cannot be used, and what you're getting into when you walk into a physical space. And so that plays very much in an outdoor public arena. And I think that's something just from an awareness and engagement of individuals is foundationally important. The work on data valuation, and sorry it took me forever to get to that, is on, at the highest order, engaging businesses in the sustainable use of their data and technological insights. It's not just data, it's their processing, it's a variety of different skill sets. But how do we emerge and create and have a better understanding, quite frankly, of the economics of these collaborative efforts? Here to date, you can do a survey of all types of different pilots. They're almost always underwritten by a donor, a non-commercial actor, an agency, and you can almost start the clock and say within 18 to 24 months when that initial grant runs out, so does the collaborative effort. And so the work that we've been focused on is how to make the sustainable economics of these collaborative efforts not an afterthought. And so that bridges very quickly to, well, what are the economics? How can businesses begin to understand the value they're created in measurable terms? And one of the key elements of that is the ability to have better accounting standards in the reuse of their intangible assets, right? So if data is donated in the context of a disaster, if a business sent blankets, water, whatever type, that would be an easy thing to write off. If a mobile operator shares, this is where people are going, this is likely where they'll be a month, 2 weeks from now, that becomes a form of charity, right? That is generally business risk. That there's carve-outs, there's exigencies that you can reduce some of the liabilities, but you can't write it off like you would if you were donating blankets. And so that, is one of the areas that we're focused on, and delighted to work with Denise and IVI and Marcus in creating up those tools and accountability. Real quickly, as far as one of the outcomes we're delivering in this work stream is to create a shared knowledge repository. And I know the work of IVI is great element. And so the hope is to build and expand upon that, to identify certain use cases in different regions where the reuse of public or private sector data is driving these outcomes. So some tied to environment and carbon emissions, some tied in sustainable agriculture. There's a variety of work that we're doing in the trustworthy use of population movement data, given that we're now at just levels of forced migration that the world has never seen, including World War II. So there's a variety of different use cases, and then ultimately, how do we simplify it? How do we enable the capacities of leaders and individuals who are practitioners not to have to sit on calls like this just to get a framing that makes sense to them, but can we be more prescriptive in building out a community of practice so that when an NGO approaches a large private sector data holder, that there's somebody whose job it is to understand what the request is, understand and do his best to reuse the data, but in a way that's safe, accountable, and aligns with business purpose. But ultimately, their job is to use the data in ways they never thought of. And so that discipline and capacity of data stewardship is something that we also feel is quite essential. So in a general sense, the work that we're doing is to provide business leaders and data holders with the tools and the approaches, the community, and ultimately the outcomes that will foster better use of emerging technologies, data in particular, to drive the outcomes we want. And the last bit I'll add is, I think from an opportunity perspective, the emergence of auditable indicators, the ESG elements, is just a fantastic opportunity that's emerged over the last couple of years, where we can stop talking about data and start talking about the outcome and how do we judge if we're achieving that, and are we doing better today than we were yesterday. So thanks so much, and thanks, Denise, back to you.
Thank you so much, Bill. Again, another really insightful presentation, so that we kind of get to see yet another aspect of this. The first three words I wrote down were trustworthy, transparent, and inclusive. And those three words certainly encompass a huge amount when we're looking at data for good and the challenges there. I think also, I suppose, as you finished there talking about the indicators and focusing on the outcomes, I think that can really bring huge value, and the whole topic of data valuation. I think that's such an interesting area because it's something that definitely hasn't been conquered, or it needs a lot more work in that specific space. But I suppose it's something that I know we have discussed, but I think that can really help companies, help businesses, and help people tackle these challenges and see where we can take it. So thank you so much for that, Bill. And in the interest of time, we'll keep moving on. So next we have Mary Flynn, who is a manager in the quantity surveying division at Dublin City Council. So again, I suppose Mary's background here as a quantity surveyor emphasises again the multidisciplinary expertise needed in this area. Mary has been working in the AEC industry for over 30 years in Ireland and the UK, and joined the Dublin City Council in 2016, having previously come from the private sector. Mary is also co-founder of the public BIM group, the Building Information Management group, and comprising major public bodies and collaborating on common interests such as BIM, public works contracts, and digital transformation. So Mary is also passionate about the use of data for the public good through its collection, harvesting, mining, and analytics. And Mary also guest lectures with various colleges too, and is the Secretary General for the European Council of Construction Economists. So again, I know you're going to really enjoy Mary's talk as well, because as Mary, as I said there in the intro, is very passionate about this area too, and can bring another perspective from the BIM side of things. So Mary, over to you. Okay, we can't hear you at the moment, Mary, and we can't see your slides. We're just seeing the room here. So maybe if you want to stop sharing maybe first. And if you want to come off mute then as well first before trying to share. Sorry, Mary, we still can't hear you there. You may need to change the mic through the mute option there. Stress of online. We could hear Mary earlier, so we'll just hang on another minute and see can we get Mary's mic working there, because as I say, having spoken to Mary prior to this, it's such a I suppose an interesting talk that she has, and an insight that she can give. Still no sound, Mary. Unless you want to, Mary, log out and come back in. I'm not too sure if that'll make a difference, but we can keep an eye on it here from our side if you want to try and come back in, because it was working okay. And just while we're waiting for Mary there, we were going to just wait till the end. Marcus, I don't know, do you want to say a few words there while we wait for Mary? So Marcus Helford is as I mentioned, the director of IVI and the director of Empower Research Programme, and was just going to have a quick few words at the end of the discussion. But I think while we wait for Mary, we might go to Marcus now.
Exactly. So I can say a few words on the topic reflection, but also when I listened actually to the presenters so far and the topic, I thought this is fantastic. Like the opportunity what we have with Empower and the data governance program and the research, the community. So it's somewhere too good that we actually don't do anything about it. So we really should solve this. We really need to do this. We need to, so there are so many use cases. So Andrea, you mentioned some of them: homeless, environmental inequality, and also you have a fantastic setup with the fellowship program. So I think that shows the benefits of it. Then Martin, you mentioned it in the European context, risk, and also that world, that transition from somewhere moving online to basically the risk and understanding that trustworthiness. And you mentioned the EU Data Governance Act. So I think there's a lot of work to do to understand what that means, context, and helping people to really working and being in that trustworthy environment. And then Bill, you mentioned the initiatives with the World Economic Forum, common purpose, data sharing, and bringing that to a sustainable way, so that it's not just projects, that it actually becomes an ongoing activity. You mentioned also trustworthiness, and you mentioned these indicators, ESGs, and so on. And I was thinking basically maybe we should get to that basically that we don't talk about data for good as an additional area. We need to think about that actually data for good should be just a common norm, as it at the moment becomes sustainability, environmental. And I think when we use data, and I would agree, we use data for a certain purpose, for a certain outcome, that we actually think about that data for good is, and we can do that, why not? Why don't we use repurposed data and help actually the society? Because if we say that data for good is there, and there must be then something for data which we don't use for good. So that's a bit of a strange concept. So I really think we need to incorporate that into all the principles, what we do when we deal with data, that we think about data for good. And that's where I think the Empower program for data governance, with the multidisciplinary, with the topics, and when I listen to the presentations, I think it reflects very well what we research with industry partners, with the research centers together on technologies. We research on privacy, preserving technologies, but also automating data governance practices. So we're using artificial intelligence, machine learning to really improve data governance and automating them and helping to preserve privacy. We're looking at standards, technology standards, but also standards in the sense of data management, business practices, standards. And then we expanded that on regulation, so the context. So thinking about, so what is kind of the mix between regulation, compliance, and still allowing for opportunities and opportunities in a fair way. And we get further, we're looking at data value, ecosystem, value streams, data sharing. So how can that be in an economic sense, but in that sense of a data economy done, and at the same time balancing that to ethics, user-centered and human-centered approaches. So what is actually really the balance between exploiting on the one side data and on the other side still considering other aspects, human-centered aspects and ethics. And that's basically what we brought together as an interdisciplinary research program. And as I said on the beginning of my reflections, a few sentences, I'm really glad that we have that, because I think we can contribute a lot to data for good, but data governance in a good way around, and helping to bring data for good out of that niche area to bring it really as a common aspect, a common practice around this. So, and I think I stopped for the moment here. I see Mary is online, so I don't know if.
Hi, Mary.
The technical
Yeah, will we do a take two and see, does that work? Unfortunately, no, we still have no sound. I'm just wondering if you took the headset and just went with the PC sound, would that maybe make a difference? So I think we have some sound.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, brilliant. I've tried something different. Technology is brilliant when it works, but it doesn't always work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mary, we can see your slides as well. So we're looking forward to listening to your talk. So I'll hand it straight over to you, Mary.
Thank you very much, Denise. I'm following three really good people. I wish I knew all they knew. I'd love to know as much as they do. But I'm coming at it from a non-data scientist point of view. And I'm not even a data analytics person, but I know what I want analyzed. I just don't know how to do it necessarily. But I'm looking at this data governance and data for good, and I'm passionate about data for good because we are the public sector, and we're the biggest single producer of data and information on the island. We spend the most money, we produce the most data, either as in various forms, from BIM models to digital twins to all sorts of data in all its ways, really, I suppose. So I'm looking at it from the point of view of what is data governance for us, because we're public sector. We're kind of behind the commercial sector and the private sector. But we're also very conservative, and we also have to look at, we would be very concerned about data and about the use of data and about data being out in the ethers, for want of a better word. So for us, we define data governance because we need to know what data is, and I've defined it here, so we're all talking about the same thing, and it's really about, this is where we want to be, and we want to have, I suppose we need to have trust in the data. Now, data matters, and data governance matters considerably to us, because there's a lot of risks in sharing data, and we operate in silos, and we want to be able to share data because we recognize the benefits of doing it, and we recognize the fact that when we share data, and we have shared data in the past, we've had great outcomes from it, outcomes we could not get on our own, and we need the collaboration, and we need the sharing of it. And the thing is, the public sector produces this information, but we're all taxpayers, and because we're producing such wonderful information, we don't want it to be a one-off use. We want it to have multiple uses and to be out there so that researchers can use it, colleges can use it, anyone can use it, within reason, obviously. So it matters considerably to us, because the whole idea is that we can create more data at a lower cost, and we can do it in real time, in the right format, and we know there's a transparency in it, and there's a legal process, so we know it's a safe process. Now, we set out a long time ago with an objective, and I think it's probably very ambitious, but our overall goal was to create a smart, and I was thinking organisations, so that's within the country, universities, councils, governments, within smart cities, within a smart Ireland, to improve the lives of our citizens through the use of data governance and open data for public good. Now, we have involved in a few endeavours in the use of open data. Dublin City Council hosted a hackathon in 2019 with James Gorman, Development Agency, and it was fantastic. The amount of information and the amount of use cases we got out of it was just mind-blowing. We got fantastic uses out of it. It was over a weekend, but it was one of the best things. It surpassed all our expectations. It really, really did. I suppose I'll start off with the key challenges, and I'm thinking from the point of view of a non-data scientist, data for public good. We're very keen to share it, but we have a problem with data. And our problem with data is it's not, the data isn't classified. There's classified and structured data, and then there's unstructured data. That's quantity of the data we produce is unstructured, unfortunately. And for us to use it, we'd have to go through a correct naming, we'd have to structure it, we'd have to clean it, we'd have to sanitize it, we have to do so many things with it. And up to very recently, we didn't have that capacity to do that. We want to do it as a public sector. We want the whole data come together and do it as a public sector. But basically, I suppose where we're coming from is you're right, Constance. Our problem is we don't have the same degree of trust.
Sorry, Mary, to interrupt just for 1 second. It's kind of getting a little bit harder to hear. It's a little bit muffled for us. Now we can see your slides and we can pretty much get the gist, but it's just a little bit muffled.
I apologise for that. I don't know what it is. I've tried. I've had our IT guys look at it, and I honestly don't know what it is. Can you hear me if I speak a little louder?
Yeah, I'd say if you kind of because it's muffled, I think if you speak kind of louder and a bit slower, we might be able to kind of pick it up a little bit easier. I
do apologise for this.
That's okay, Mary.
But if we look at data from the perspective of, if we go back to first principles, I know you guys are much further ahead, Andrea and Martin and William are much further ahead than we are. When we go back to the first principles and we look at the data quality, and we recognise that the data is only as good as the quality of the information, and the other thing of the site. That's what you get. Basically.
Sorry, Mary, I'm going to come back in again because we're just it's too hard to actually to decipher there. It's just very muffled. We thought maybe if the headset, if you did use the headset, maybe that would work better. You're just on mute there now, Mary. No, I think we can't get you there now either. Yeah, I think we'll leave it, Mary. I'm sorry there now that we can't, because to say, I know from I suppose previous discussions, this area is definitely something that is really interesting, and what we can do is maybe look at recording your presentation separately for people, so that people can get an idea of what you're doing there, because I think even just from the beginning of that, I think what's interesting is the way you phrased about the smart cities and a smart Ireland, and using data governance to reach that goal. And I think even in that in itself kind of reflects the mindset change around that data governance is an enabler. It's a facilitator. It's not a gatekeeper, which might have been more the traditional view of it. So I think even in that statement alone, it's quite a powerful one of the role of data governance and where it's going from. And I know from previous discussions how you mentioned, the amount of data that is being collected by your organization, but that a really small percentage of that data is being used at the moment. So I think what we'll do there, you could, even if you have some comments as we move to the discussion part, please do put them maybe in the chat there, Mary, and I can relay those comments to the rest of the audience here. So thank you, Mary, and apologies that we can't continue with the presentation there because we just can't hear at the moment, but we will be back to you, I think, to record that separately, because I think it's of huge value for everyone to hear. So I suppose with that, I'm going to put things open to some questions. I know there was a question very early on, Andrea, around, is this available to new immigrants? That was to your program there. So we might just start off with addressing that question.
Yeah, sure. So I'm not sure I quite understand the question, by the way, but our program is available to fellows who are either in education or just 2 years after they have graduated from anywhere in the world. So, this year we ran a program. There was something like 14 of us involved. I think 2 were German, and everybody else was from all over, from Latin America to US to the rest of the Europe, previous editions have included people from Asia as well. Very rarely do we have people from Africa, which is something that we really want to address and try to kind of popularize more program there so that we can spread the word and get more applications. But what's maybe also worth saying is that, so we kind of have always had gender parity in our program. So, you know, we kind of are working towards achieving diversity in other ways as well. So it is open to new immigrants, old immigrants, not immigrants, anybody who's interested in working, really.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrea. And I think, I suppose, just even on that program and that question, it shows again the interest in it and people wanting to know more and see where we can actually and go from there. I suppose one of the things that strikes me about the discussion today, as I've probably mentioned a few times now, the different perspectives, the difference of, you know, what is data for good, you know, coming from something you mentioned in public procurement to I suppose very different areas around homelessness and so forth to climate challenges that we're all going in. And I'll throw this to Martin first around data for good, I suppose, because it's so broad. What is your view? Andrea has, I suppose, given us examples of how to tackle challenges in this area in, I don't want to call it bite size, but in that 12-week program, there are bigger challenges. Martin, what do you think are the kind of approach to addressing the bigger challenges?
I think one thing I try to communicate in my slides is that, you know, there's a huge opportunity to do good with data. And for me, one of the kind of most critical responses we can develop is climate risk, and to empower citizens to make more informed decisions regarding their daily lives, behavior, activities, what they buy, what they purchase, how they're consumed as consumers. They're impacting climate risk, and how they can mitigate climate risk through using, let's say, like one thing that's emerging, which is a really kind of fantastic idea, is the idea of a citizen European app. So this app would contain your driving license, your passport, your general kind of citizen data, but it would also be a source of information for you to empower citizens to participate in governance development of mechanisms and instruments, but also to make decisions regarding how you want data to be used in your life and how you want your state, your government and the EU to respond better to climate change. So I think there's huge opportunities here. And I think really, if we look at how, you know, generally we've embraced the app ecosystem, how we use, all of us use our phones. And, you know, I have a daughter who's 13, and for some time I've said, no, you're not using TikTok. And, you know, slowly but surely she wore me down. And, you know, eventually there's the peer pressure that you know, but what you can do is you can help them understand the risks better and to use it in a careful and informed way. So by empowering people, by empowering citizens, we can have a more risk-aware use of technology. And that means that we can not only support the growth of innovation and competition, but we can do it in a way that is slowly directing it towards social good. And I think that the real, you know, what we're really seeing now is pushback from citizens, from groups, to basically give states and governments a political agenda to do data for good.
So, that's great, Martin. Yeah, and I think that covers quite a number of areas there, as you say, and the kind of, as you say, the pushback, and I think that's critical at the moment as well. There's another theme that has come up kind of throughout the talks, and it is really around community. Right across each of you are of the panelists have kind of created communities within what you're doing in addressing those challenges. And I guess I'll go to Bill on this one first, because you know, this is core, I guess, to what the World Economic Forum is bringing together multi-stakeholders. What is your advice to to maybe businesses and individuals around getting involved in initiatives like this? I suppose we are in the IVI and in the Empower Research Programme, we have created a community of practice there as well, and it is about bringing multi-stakeholders. I suppose just to get your feedback, Bill, on that area and the value of that from your perspective of what you've seen in the World Economic Forum.
Sure, I think like any complex problem, it's choose which priority is shared. And I think, as Martin just mentioned, there's all types of really complex, urgent challenges on the environment, right? I mentioned forced migration and just the millions of people that are moving across borders, having to move in a variety of elements is something that's unprecedented and systemic. So one of the goals and objectives of the forum is to align on shared global challenges. Another framing, I would say, is to engage different stakeholder communities in a world that they want, is to speak their language. And one of the ways that I personally feel is important to more effectively engage business leaders is speaking to them through the language of risk. Particularly long-term investors, right? They risk model, but trillions and trillions of dollars of capital are allocated depending on how risks are lowered. And I think from a narrative perspective, and this isn't a criticism, but everybody thinks of risk as the negative. And so one of the things that I try, and many others as well, is just to simply frame it through a business lens that lowering shared risks is another way of saying market, and that businesses have a fiduciary responsibility to pursue. And so one of the larger goals and hopes is to, start to frame conversations where there is a fiduciary responsibilities to pursue some of these, I'll call them non-financial outcomes, but you can see it, in the energy transition and carbon reduction. That's business relevant, right? Of course it matters, and there's all types of other returns we'll get, but jobs are lost, right? If those metrics aren't lost. And so that from a coaching perspective would be in framing the need to engage in these things in direct commercial risk narratives that will just simply show how their businesses will be more sustainable over time. And then on, I'll call it the demand side, right, of the NGOs, of non-governmental actors, is undoing, if you will, the decades and decades of misperception and perception, right, of business coming in and exclusively wanting to commercialize, to exploit, to extract, to leverage their power asymmetries and co-opt the mission and mandate of others. I think there is a growing balance. And of course, those concerns need to always be approached in any context. But I think there's just a willingness, right, for some of the staunchest advocates that have been saying, no, this needs to be managed exclusively in a public environment, that those winds are changing a bit, right? That there's people opening up to those more multi-stakeholder dialogues. And so I guess that one is, it's are the nature of our challenges, the complexity, the velocity of how they hit, we've never faced before, and just relying on kind of, I'll call them old world perceptions, could, regardless of where you're at, could have a cost over time.
Absolutely. And I think, as you say, it is that mindset change towards the need for multi-stakeholder, the need for multidisciplinary to overcome these challenges and move forward. And you mentioned another word there, and Marcus mentioned it a few times as well, balance. And I think that in itself is a challenge, but that's also key to moving ahead. And I think through bringing communities together, a mix of organizations and different types of organizations, I think that's, I suppose, how we can achieve that balance as well, and ensure that this really is that a good for the common good, as you have worded it as well in the World Economic Forum. So before I ask anything else, I'm just going to see if there are any more questions from anyone in the room here as well? No, or will we?
Not a question, but maybe just an idea or suggestion, also what Bill just said about kind of risk and valuing and seeing that from a commercial point of view. And in the presentation, you mentioned the accounting and valuation of data. And I think that's a key element. So if we share data, and particularly if we share it for common purpose, for data for good, or if we transfer it to the voluntary sector, we need to evaluate and to also have agreements, what the value is, what is the risk. And I think that prevents a lot of sharing of data at the moment, that there are no agreed standards, how to value data in that way, how to share the risk. And then also on the other side, if we actually create value, if we create certain outcomes, we need to think about how do we share that value back maybe to the people or the organizations who created that value or the data. So, and I think there's a lot of just one way stream of basically sharing data. We create some outcomes, some value, some benefits, and then we don't think about actually how to incentivize, how to share value in a fair way in a value system. And I think that network and looking at value streams and how value sharing can be done in a fair way is a really interesting concept. And if we can solve some parts out of this with agreements, with ways, best practices, I think data sharing will be much easier, and we realize far more of these really good examples.
Thank you, Marcus. Yeah, I think the data sharing it's something again that impacts so many from across sectors, across businesses, or even from each individual. And I think that's why it's so important, because we're all generating data. So, you know, we want to understand, I suppose, how that data is shared, which brings me to the next question, which is, due to high levels of skepticism as to the security of personal data and how it is used now by other actors, how do you reassure individuals that the data they provide and share is safe? So Andrea, I might go to you first on that, and we'll go to the rest of the panelists, and Mary, if you have some comments on that, please pop them in the chat. But Andrea, I suppose through the work that you've done, obviously getting access to data can be difficult, and you probably have to go through all sorts of ethics approvals and things like that. So what is when you're faced with this problem, how do you tackle it?
So maybe we are fortunate that we're not faced with the problem of reassuring individuals, because we work with organizations rather than the kind of end users. So at no point do I have to sort of convince somebody that my app is not going to steal, their firstborn child. But so with the organizations, we can't do that by. It's possibly just there is some trust already, maybe because of the way how these partners approach us or how we get to know them, because usually we have somebody introducing, but usually we store their data in a trusted research environment, in a data safe haven. That was our practice in the UK, and it's our practice here. We are developing this further as well to kind of ensure even kind of additional access ways and kind of sharing of maybe an additional data. But we also we are ourselves apprehensive about the sorts of data that we have. So sometimes we say no to certain data, so we kind of turn it down because we feel like it's too high of a risk for where we judge that we currently are and what our capacity is to undertake. So for example, when we worked with investigative journalists, we only accepted data that's been in a public domain rather than like leaks that are not public, that might contain, for example, state secrets, or might motivate another state actor to kind of try to test our security, because we are a research institute after all. So with the individuals, I don't know. I think with the organizations, that is partly to do with the working relationship still, I think. But we are working on kind of having more of like standards that kind of can prove that a solution that we have in place is properly equipped to handle the sensitivity of data. So I also wish that some people were more skeptical about sharing their data. For example, the 13-year-olds on TikTok.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's even as a parent, I think that's one thing that is a concern of, you know, that there isn't, and I guess it goes back to they are digital natives, and they just think at the younger age groups that, you know, it's fine. But I think I guess that goes back to education and awareness as well as many other, I think, regulations that are out there. To Martin, I guess the same question, because, you know, it is an important thing, and it is something that people are concerned about sharing their data, and how do we get that reassurance across from your perspective?
Well, I suppose the first thing of all is that we have to contextualize what kind of data we're talking about. So, for example, if you're talking about behavioral data generated on TikTok, right? You know, typically that would be low risk data. Now it could be, you know, added to further kind of data points and to better understand the behavioral kind of nature of a person for advertising purposes. But when we're talking about health data, then everything changes. Because suddenly then we have data that, you know, might be specifically impactful on a person's well-being or welfare. And, you know, if, for example, a commercial actor such as an insurance company has access to someone's data in terms of their health or their genetic data, they can commodify that. They can use that to price the risk of that person, or even to avoid giving that person an insurance coverage or premium. So in terms of security, there's two levels to it. One is that there has to be security in terms of where data is generated and managed in a commercial context, and who has access to that data. And that's what the EU is trying to do with the data spaces in general, to make sure that all stakeholders involved in the data space have a general kind of trustworthy and positive purpose for the use of that data. And it's for social good. If we're talking about data in terms of, you know, actual, I suppose the responsibility and the legality of managing data and making sure that that data is not open to being hacked or being misused, then, you know, again, there's significant compliance to do that. And we've seen from kind of the headlines over the last few years where commercial actors, whether it's the hotel chains or airways or airline companies, have been fined, you know, usually for not being compliant in terms of data management. So what we have really is an emerging kind of dynamic where data is becoming more and more used, but there's questions and uncertainty in terms of who makes that data valuable, and who has the responsibility for managing that data. So I think that's where we're at, Denise, is that, you know, we all want to kind of say, look, you know, there's data opportunities here, there's regulation to guide us in terms of how we can use and commercialize and manage that data. But because the nature of the data ecosystem is so dynamic and so changing, that we're always pushing the boundaries of, you know, knowing how to make an informed decision. And that's why, you know, when we talk about community, we're talking about community support in order to help, you know, different stakeholders to understand the risks and responsibilities of data use. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it highlights as well the need for a move from access of data to usage of data, and how we tackle that, and I suppose that the frameworks and the, you know, the practices that we introduce that those in themselves will give people reassurance. And you know, when you're looking at trust, it's not usually an instant thing, so it has to be typically built up over time. But if we have you know, really sound practices in place, and obviously, as you mentioned, GDPR and other regulations coming out and changes in that, once more people become aware of these and understand how their data is used, I think that as well will help in the reassurance of that. And Mary has mentioned as well, just in a comment here, that in the Dublin City Council, that this was, they tackled this through the use of licenses. So again, it's I think the same principle really. It's going back to an agreement in place, and having the trust there to know how your data is being used. And I suppose before we're getting close to a close here, but just wondered, Bill, if you have any comments on that area as well, because again, if we don't reach the goal of either open data or data sharing, you know, the whole data for good challenges that we want to address won't be achieved. So I suppose just to maybe a final word to yourself on this area.
Oh yeah, thank you, Denise. I think Martin nailed it as well. It depends. So what's the problem? What's the data? What's the context? And if we can all remember, that's where we should start. And the last, you know, the other thing that I'll say is that in so many areas, these are local issues, the local community, the engagement of cities and local municipalities is just foundational to how I think we'll drive global change. And so finding the means and mechanisms to take the local impacts, to standardize the measurement of those outcomes and roll them up to indicators like the SDGs, I think is how any complex system evolves, right? If we can start to build and design systems, acknowledging that the change happens outside in, bottom up, choose your favorite metaphor, that's how I think we'll achieve global scale. I'm personally, despite my employer and title, just not a big fan that the change we want happens, you know, top down. It's a balance. So I think my general remark is it depends and start local. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bill, and a great way to end. I want to thank all the panelists for their fantastic contribution, and I guess just as well, just to thank everybody who has attended today and fed in some questions there as well. It's a topic I think near and dear to most people's hearts, and it's one that there is most certainly, and we can see from today even, that there's an appetite for change here and to drive this forward, and we're certainly very excited about being part of that. And as I say, being able to move forward with that. So I'd also just make the comment that if anybody wants to connect with us afterwards, you will have the details. This is being recorded, so please do feel free to share this as well with colleagues afterwards. So thank you to everybody for attending.